Well, thanks again for coming, Susan. We appreciate you coming, joining our session, starting strong with compliant early childhood transitions. Um, I am Rosalind Chandler and have with me my colleague, Patrick McGinley. And
Hello.
so, oh, okay. So just to introduce myself a little bit, I have been with the IEPTA Center or Individualized Education Program Technical Assistance Center for almost 8 years. And okay, somebody's coming in. Okay, so for almost 8 years prior to that, I worked for the school district and of course in Indiana for over 35 years. And Patrick, you want to give a little information about yourself and then I'll continue on?
Sure. My name is Patrick McGinley. I'm also a TA specialist, the IEP TA Center. Most of the work I do involves data, database problem solving, and anything that surrounds anything that involves data, which is kind of anything and everything in education and in special ed. Um, and I've been working with the Technical Assistance Center, formerly Indiana IEP Resource Center, for 12 years, I think. So happy to be here and happy to be working with Rosalind on presenting this topic.
Yes, thank you. Same here. And thanks for the others that have joined us. We were just doing a little introduction of ourselves and the IEPTA Center, and which is the purpose of the our center, the IEPTA Center, is to increase your knowledge and your skills and your capacity of our Indiana educators, and to with the outcome, with the purpose of improving outcomes for students with disabilities. And our center also promotes education with a belief in shared responsibility and access to a strong core curriculum with high quality instruction that would benefit all students. So that is what our mission, our purpose is as the IEPTA Center. Okay, can you go to the next slide, Patrick? Okay, to the next one. So we
Do you
work.
see it now?
Yes, okay, now I see it. So yes, we work with the Indiana Department of Education in order to provide the services to Indiana educators and students throughout the state of Indiana. Okay. Okay, so we will go on to the next slide, overview of today's discussion, which this is what our talking points would be for this afternoon. Um, Transition responsibility, the responsibilities for first steps, the responsibilities for the LEA, federal requirements, state requirements, and compliance reporting. And then at the end, we have some frequently asked questions, and we will also allow for you to ask questions. You can feel free to put questions, any questions that you have in the chat, or you may unmute yourself if you have a question about something. Okay, so our objective for this session is for each one of you to gain a better or deeper understanding of early childhood, of that process, the early childhood transition process. Also, as I mentioned about the transition responsibilities for first steps in the LEA, and also for you get a better understanding of the state and federal requirements for early childhood transition. Okay, so we will go ahead and dig into it with the transition responsibilities. First steps, see, can you go to the next screen? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, so First Steps has responsibilities, and they are required to notify the LEA where the child is receiving services resides. And they're to notify them of those children who are potentially eligible to receive early childhood special education services or Part B services. And they're to do so at least 6 months prior to the child turning 3. So this is typically done when the child is 30 months old. Indiana is not an opt-out state, so this information that's sent from First Steps to the LEA will be transmitted or should be transmitted regardless of parental consent. Also, as a responsibility, First Steps initiates the transition planning meeting. This is something that they do. And with parental consent, the LEA can be invited to this meeting. And now if First Steps determines that the child is eligible for services over 45 days, but less than 90 days before their third birthday, they may provide the transition notification to the Indiana Department of Ed and the LEA upon determining that child's eligibility, that they are eligible to receive those Part B services. If the time frame is like between 45 and 90 days, then they must let the LEA know immediately as soon as possible of that whether that child is eligible. And also if it's less than 45 days, then they would send the parent to the LEA. First Steps will send a parent to the LEA for the referral. So the LEA will take care of it if it's less than 45 days before that child's third birthday. Also, as a responsibility, First Steps provides the LEA with PII, personally identifiable information, which is the child's name, their date of birth, the parent's contact information. So this is something that is provided to the LEA. And this information that is like a monthly report that's given, and it must be given within that 30-month period when that child turns 30 months old. So that information is transmitted to the LEA. Now, with the parent's permission or consent, they can also provide the LEA with the individualized family service plans and that report, as well as any evaluation reports from any source. But that's only with the parent's written permission. Okay. Any questions? And everybody okay? All right. Okay, so we'll go on. That was the First Steps responsibilities. We'll go to the LEA responsibilities. So after they receive the information, that child's information from First Steps, they reach out to the family in order to begin the evaluation process. And also procedural safeguards that outline FAPE, or right to a free and appropriate public education. That's also provided too. The family, of course, has the right to reject services at any time during this process. And as mentioned previously, Indiana is not an opt-out state, so this information is given to the LEA regardless of parental consent. Another responsibility of the LEA is that as far as by the time the child turns 3 or when on that child's third birthday, what the LEA is responsible for doing is completing its evaluation, putting together a case conference committee to determine eligibility for special education and related services. And then if the student is eligible, they have to take into, for the services, they have to develop an IEP for that student and take into consideration the student's family service plan. Also, by that child's third birthday, the LEA will implement the IEP. Okay, so if a student's third birthday occurs during the summer and it has been determined by the case conference committee that the student requires extended school year services, then the student's IEP must indicate or state that those services will be initiated during the summer, during the time that that child turns 3. Now, if the student does not require extended school year services, then the IEP will also state that the services will be initiated at the beginning of the upcoming school year. Okay, so in addition, at the request of the parent, an invitation to the initial IEP meeting must be sent to the First Steps service coordinator or representative. Of course, the child has received First Step services, so this information will also be sent to them only on the request of the parent, though. All right, so we'll go on to the next slide. Basic steps to transition. So we kind of covered, this is just kind of like a little bit of a summary of what we just discussed. Step one in the transition process is that if the student is served with First Steps, there will be a transition planning conference, which is initiated by First Steps. So this transition planning meeting that they initiate is not initiated by the LEA. The LEA can attend that meeting with the parent's permission, though. Step two in the process is that the student is served, is that the LEA will receive contact information and will reach out to schedule an evaluation so that contact information, that personally identifiable information for the child will be sent to them from First Steps to the LEA. And then, of course, the LEA reaches out to schedule an evaluation, educational evaluation for the student. And if the child was not served with First Steps, then the parent can make a written or oral request for an evaluation, and they would do so with the LEA. After the evaluation, the case conference committee will meet in order to determine eligibility. And if eligible, they will write an IEP for that student that supports the services, the special education services that the student needs and any related services. In step four, the parent signs to approve the IEP or revisions are made at that time. And lastly, in this process, step five, IEP is implemented by the third birthday. And unless, of course, it's a summer birthday and that the student does not need to have extended school year services. So we kind of talked about that already as far as extended school year services if their birthday falls in the summertime. All right, so I'm seeing, I guess. Okay, I thought there were some questions. I was just double checking the chat. All right, so we'll go on to the federal requirements for transition. According to the federal requirements, they are to provide, or we are to provide, a free, appropriate public education, and it must be made available to all children residing in the state between the ages of 3 and 21. So for children that who are age 3 and up, that's when FAPE begins at the age of 3. And it's brought out here that the state must ensure that is made available for each child residing in the state. They will have either IEP, an individualized education plan or program, or a service plan. And it's to be in effect by the child's third birthday. If the child's third birthday again occurs during the summer, the IEP team will determine when the services under the IEP or service plan will begin. So that's a determination that's made by the IEP team. And of course, the parent is part of that team as well. Now, we also have state requirements. And the state requirements, of course, they are in accord with the federal regulations in order to make sure that children with disabilities have a right to FAPE. So the students with disabilities to have a right to faith, they may qualify for eligibility up under. There's 13 different categories that they can qualify for eligibility under, which are listed here. Most children before the ages of 3, developmental delay is one that is often looked at, is the developmental delay, or people are alerted to, whether it's the family, parents, or someone would be alerted to whether or not that child may have a developmental delay in comparison to other children. And each one of these categories, these 13 categories, are discussed in Article 7. For if you need it, if you want more information, you can always consult Article 7 to get information on that. Okay, so evaluation, that's another state requirement. And up under evaluation, we have the multidisciplinary team. And what they do is they use a variety of assessment tools and strategies in order to gather relevant functional, developmental, and academic information about the student. And they also get information, of course, that's provided by the parent, because of course the parent knows, have a great deal of information about their child. The multidisciplinary team will comprise a group of qualified professionals who conduct that student's educational evaluation. They can include the early childhood, one who's licensed to teach early childhood special education, a school psychologist, if needed, a speech language pathologist, of course, any teacher licensed in or specialist with knowledge in the area of the suspected disability for that child. So that multidisciplinary team is made up of those individuals with that knowledge base. So after a parent has provided consent for the evaluation, then the LEA must conduct a comprehensive and individual educational evaluation, and that's in accord with Article 7. The evaluation must be conducted by them and by the multidisciplinary team that prepares the educational evaluation report. After the evaluation has been completed, then they must compile the findings that they have come up with, and bring about this evaluation report. So after they do their gathering of information, then they comprise this into an evaluation report. As part of the evaluation, they review existing evaluation data on the student, such as evaluations and information that's provided by the parent of the student. They also take into consideration current classroom, local, and state assessments, and classroom-based observations and observations by teachers and related service personnel or providers. So it's a lot of information that they're taking in or that they're gathering in order to come up with or to develop the evaluation report. So our next requirement for the state is eligibility. Upon completion of that educational eval, the CCC will meet in order to determine if the student is eligible for special education and related services. And once they do this, they'll consider all the information that's contained in the report and not rely just on one thing in order to determine eligibility, for services for that child. So they'll take into consideration all the information in the educational report and not look at just one thing or one sole criterion for determining eligibility. And so if a determination has been made that that student is eligible for those services, then an IEP that meets those services that that student needs must be developed for that child. And of course, all of this must take place by that child's third birthday, as mentioned earlier. Now, if the parent disagrees with the educational evaluation that was done by the public agency, the school corporation, then they can request an independent educational evaluation be done, and they can get this information. They would get this information from the LEA or school corporation or school as to who they can have this independent evaluation done. Okay. So now we'll go on to the next slide. I just kind of summed up what was on that one there. So they have a right, and also that they they won't have to pay for this independent educational evaluation. This would be typically at the expense of the LEA. Okay, so another state requirement is the case conference committee. The case conference committee is comprised of various individuals, such as the public agency representative, the parent of the student, at least one of the student's general education teachers, a speech language pathologist, possibly a student's teacher of record. And the child can be also included in the case conference committee unless the parent doesn't want the child to participate. And also at least one member of that multidisciplinary team who evaluated the student. So that would make up the case conference committee, the CCC. Now, the case conference committee can also include a First Steps service coordinator or other representative, but only at the request of the parent. And also at the request of the parent or the LEA, other individuals who have knowledge about that student or specified or special knowledge about that student or in related services, they can also be included in the case conference committee. Typically, the parent wants, since this is early childhood transition, the parent typically wants that First Steps coordinator or representative to be included in the case conference committee. Okay. All right, so that kind of sums up what the responsibilities are for First Steps, the LEA, for what the state requirements are and what the federal requirements are. So now I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, and we're going to go into compliance reporting.
Okay. So we're going to talk about compliance reporting. And so the reporting is really done in, as I'm sure some of you are aware already, this is something that's done in two places. So it's currently collected for now until the state moves into the power school system. It's being collected in Indiana IEP, where everything's being documented already, but also through your district's student information system, which is what feeds into data exchange. So, and the data is entered into both of those systems really based on what your local procedures are for documenting things. And it's important that the data is reported in both places, right? So we're reporting it separately for now, um, until once Power School happens and is implemented um, statewide, then that would all just be in that one place. But for now, it's important to make sure that the data is not only documented in both places, but that it matches, that it's the same, so that there aren't any discrepancies. And there are ways to export that data from Indiana IEP. There's that DOE EV report that can be exported from that system, and I know there's some instructions on how to do that for those that have access to doing that. I think that's through advanced reporting still. And then in data exchange, there's a file called the EV roster, which some of you may be familiar with. The terminology or I guess, yeah, for lack of a better word, field names, terminology might be a little bit different, but all the important fields are in both of those. So you can do a check to make sure that those are matching up and discrepancies. But again, very important. We want to do it in both systems. That official data collection for the EV is done over the summer. It's July is when that's collected, and it's looking at initial evaluations for not only the first steps transition evaluations for indicator 12, the federal indicator 12, but also initial evaluations under indicator 11 for all other initial evaluations. They're both included in that same file, in that same report or that EV roster that's in data exchange. And that comes from your student information system. And that spans the whole year. So that's for any initial evaluation or first steps, transition initial evaluation that starts or ends during that collection window. And so that's in the summer. That's in July is when that data is pulled. For any districts that are identified as being non-compliant, if there's a compliance issue with meeting timelines, then there are some audits, and the Department of Education has monitoring cycles that you can view more information on through a link that we have at the end of this presentation. But it's essentially an audit that they'll do for those non-compliant LEAs in the spring. They do that, I think, somewhere between October and December. I think December is kind of like the cutoff for when they do that. And then they do another one and that's just looking at initial evaluations or the first steps transitions from July through October. So just for the fall. And then there's another one if those LEAs are still non-compliant for that audit window from July to October. Then there's another audit that's done in the spring, looking at first steps transitions that occurred between January and April to see if those are in compliance. So there's a lot more information on that cycle on that link, but I just wanted to make sure we were aware that those audits are actually done right now. The audits are done in Indiana IEP, but the official data collection comes from data exchange. So even more of a reason to make sure that they're both matching and that they're both accurate, right? Not only do we want them to match, we want them to be accurate. And so sometimes we hear that term pending evaluations, and usually that's what we mean. If they're pending, then they're going to be spanning more than 1 year. So maybe there's an initial evaluation for which you receive parent consent, maybe at the end of May, like May 20th, and maybe school ends on May 31st. So, and if it's a 50-day timeline, you've got about 9 instructional days until the school year ends. But then once the school year starts back up again, the next school year, then you'll have, about 41 instructional days to complete that evaluation. So that's what we mean when we talk about pending evaluations, as you see that terminology used. We want to make sure that we're reporting students in both those reports, right? Even if it has the evaluation and the case conference meeting has not occurred yet, because that'll happen next school year. We want to make sure we're still reporting that initial, that parent consent or the referral, whatever we need in the system to trigger that so that we can keep track, or so that you at the LEA can keep track of those evaluations that need to be completed by the at some point in that upcoming school year, or perhaps in the summer. We'll talk about that in a little bit, about that summer birthday requirements. I know we'll talk a little bit about that. So state reporting, indicator 12 is that early childhood transition, and it's really just looking at the percentage of kids who are found eligible for Part B services, so services under the district, under the LEA, who have IEPs that were implemented prior to their third birthday. So what's that percentage of all those kids that were determined to be eligible for Part B services? What percentage were done on time by the again, just to reiterate, we want to make sure that we're documenting evaluations even when they're not compliant, even if we don't meet the timeline that's required. We want to make sure that that's reported accurately in the system. And if they have a summer birthday, if their birthday happens during the summer, and if the case conference committee determines that child does not need an extended school year service, then services need to begin at the beginning of the next school year. So as soon as that next school year starts, services need to begin. But it's also important to make sure, because some folks are not always aware of this, that the evaluation and the case conference still needs to happen by the third birthday, even if it's in the summer. So the only thing that can wait until the next school year is the implementation of their services, and that's only if the case conference determines that that child does not require an extended school year. So some folks, I think, assume that the eval and the case conference can wait as well, but that's actually not the case. So I know sometimes there's some issues with staffing, and it's difficult to get those things taken care of and have those meetings in the summer, but that is a requirement for First Steps transition. Again, I know I mentioned in the chat, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves or type them in the chat if we're unclear about any of these things that we're talking about. Right. So there are some allowable exceptions, and these are exceptions that can be factored out of the district's indicator 12 data. So out of that, they're not even included in the numerator or denominator when indicator 12, that percentage, is calculated. So one is if the parents refuse to provide consent, which could cause a delay in the evaluation or delay in the initial services. That is allowable. It's just really important to make sure that you're documenting everything. The state can be pretty generous with parent refusal. We just need to make sure that you're not only documenting your attempts, that you're trying multiple types of communications or multiple modes of communication. So maybe, calling, we don't want to only call if calling hasn't worked in the past. Maybe we email you electronically, we do something in writing, or vice versa. Just make sure you're documenting things there so that you can provide that evidence for that. And another allowable exception is if that child was referred to Part C less than 90 days prior to their birthday. So that's Part C being First Steps, right? So if they were referred to First Steps less than 90 days before their third birthday, that is an allowable exception. Now we'll talk about some of those additional reasons that are not considered allowable exceptions that you see here on the screen. These are not factored out of the district's data for indicator 12. So if the transition planning meeting that First Steps convened did not occur at least 90 days before their third birthday, that is not an allowable exception for indicator 12. So they're still included in that percentage. And if the child is referred to Part B, so the LEA, less than 90 days prior to the child's third birthday, that is also not an allowable exception. Now, the only way that it could be is if that child was also late being referred to first steps. So if going up to that second bullet point where it says child was referred to part C. So if them being referred to part C less than 90 days was the reason they were late, then oftentimes then they'll be referred to part B late too. But you have to have both, right, in order for the part B referral to even apply in that situation. But it would always be the reason being that they were referred to first steps less than 90 days prior to their third birthday. There's a lot of confusion around that. And I know that there's going to be some changes in the written description of the definition of that allowable exception, because even like I thought that was the case. I wasn't even aware several years ago that there was even a difference there because of just the naming conventions of those reasons that can be selected for the reasons why a timeline might be missed. Another exception that is not an allowable exception, another reason, could be district or staffing issues, staffing scheduling, things like that. So looking at indicator 11 evaluations. So for students or for children that are included in indicator 12 data for first steps referrals, they have that third birthday deadline, but all students, including those first steps transitions, also have to have the case conference has to occur within a 50 instructional day timeline of the parent consent. So that is a requirement that OSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs at the federal level, has made very clear that 50 instructional day timeline also needs to be met for first steps transitions. And that was another thing that was not clear to me, 10, 12 years ago when I started doing this. And I think a lot of people were not aware of that until OSEP came out with their FAQ document where they really clarified that was required for everybody. And there could be some cases where there's an expedited IEP, expedited evaluation, where there's 20 days instead of 50. But for early childhood, I think that would be extremely rare to see that. So the vast majority are going to be needing to be held within that 50 instructional day. And when we're talking about, like the 90 days, that's calendar days. 50 instructional days is instructional days. So that's like usually going to average probably like 70 days or something like that. And then if you've got 10 days from the parent to send the parent consent, you're kind of getting close to that 90 days already. So it's going to be usually about the same amount of time, but just make sure, because that 50 days could happen before the third birthday. So just be careful about that. So here, this is the indicator 11 initial eval timeline that I just mentioned. So when there's a request for an evaluation, the LEA has 10 instructional days to provide the parent with the written notice to evaluate. And then after that parental consent is received, that's when the timeline or the amount of instructional days to complete that timeline happens. And that depends on the type of evaluation. Again, it could be 50 days. In some cases it's 20, but most of it's 50. And so here we show the potential exceptions. And just checking the times, we have till, okay, it's 3:45, 4:45 your time, I think, for most of the people that are on here. So I think we should be good on time. Potential exceptions here. Some of these I mentioned already, but this is just the extensive list. So as we mentioned, if the parents refuse to provide consent and that causes the delay for the evaluation or initial services, that is an allowable exception under indicator 12 only. not for indicator 11. So for first steps transitions, yes, that does apply. If they're referred to Part C less than 90 days before the child's third birthday, again, yes, that is allowable. Just make sure you're documenting it. That is allowable for indicator 12. If the family and the LEA agree to extend the timeline, that is something we do see happening in schools. And that is allowable, but only for indicator 11, not for the first steps transitions, not for indicator 12. Move-ins, when the LEA is not yet completed, that would certainly be an allowable exception for indicator 12 or indicator 11, because they move into the district, and that kind of disrupts things with the timeline. If the parent repeatedly failed to present the child for the evaluation, that would also be an allowable excuse. So if they refuse to provide consent, is for indicator 12 only, but if they repeatedly fail to present the child for evaluation, that is allowable for both. Again, make sure you're documenting these communications. If they're referred to Part B less than 90 days, we mentioned this before the third birthday, that is not allowable unless they were also referred to Part C less than 90 days for the third birthday. Scheduling problems, lack of staff, that's not considered allowable. If there's a school break, including summer break, then yes, that the case conference committee does need to convene before the third birthday, but the services may be implemented if there are no extended school year, if that's not needed for the kid based on the case conference. Again, please stop me if you have any questions, you need any clarification. Some clarifications that came about from OSEP's Q&A on early childhood transition. This was in 2023. Just to kind of provide some clarification here. So if that child has an IFSP, so that's an individualized family service plan. That's what we see with students, children who have who are receiving services from First Steps. If they have one of those plans, regardless of the eligibility date, they're reported for indicator 11 and indicator 12. So that doesn't necessarily matter for anything that you are putting in these systems in IEP or in your SIS. It's just something to be aware of because of the timelines, right? So they need to meet the timelines for indicator 11 and indicator 12. And that will be made clear once their data is inputted in terms of the type of evaluation that it is. So for any child that's referred to First Steps fewer than 45 days before their third birthday, and then First Steps chooses not to evaluate because they don't need to evaluate. They're not required to evaluate a student if they're referred to First Steps for 45 days or fewer. Fewer than 45 days leading up to their birthday, they don't need to evaluate them. So that would mean that the parent would need to submit a request to the LEA, and they would only be considered an indicator 11 evaluation. Hopefully that's clear. I know that was kind of confusing for me before I read that Q&A. But First Steps does not need to do that evaluation. So if they don't, then it's just indicator 11. In that case, like any other student that's already attending the school, who becomes evaluated for special ed. So here's the list of the codes and the descriptions and the definitions that can be selected within your SIS and also within Indiana IEP. So you may be familiar with these, code 1, 2, 3, and 4. Code 1 is not used anymore. That was the 20 days expedited IEP for students that are included in RTI, response to intervention. So it's kind of an outdated perspective on what RTI is anyway. Usually that terminology is now. So that's not included as an expedited IEP definition or reason. But number 2, the 20 days instructional or 20 instructional day expedited evaluation is another option if that's due to disciplinary action. Again, very rare for younger kids. 3 is what you're going to see for any student that was transferred from First Steps. So that's going to be used in the vast majority of cases. So as long as the student has or that child has an active IFSP, that individualized family service plan, regardless of what the timeline is, they're going to be a 3. So the only time a student will be a 4 for that 50-day timeline is if that child does not have an IFSP, or if their referral to Part C is beyond the allowable timeline and First Steps refuse that evaluation. Okay, and so here's some of the reasons why the timeline compliance descriptions. So if the timeline was met, you're going to enter a 0, or you'll see a 0 in the data exchange report. However you're looking at it, it's an IP, it's the EV roster and data exchange, or in your SIS. 0 means timeline was met. And sometimes the dropdown just shows that description, timeline is met. So that's pretty clear. And these are options for any initial evaluation, regardless of whether they're First Steps transition or not. You'll see these options. One is the parents refused or delayed services. And so you see the definition here, the description of that. So like I said, you might just see the description, but you might not see the definition. So if it was missed due to the transit, parents refused or delayed services for student transitioning. So refuse doesn't always necessarily apply, right? Maybe they wanted to, or they tried, but they weren't able to, or they delayed services or something. That was the fault of the parent, or the parent was the reason why they were unable to conduct that, or for the student to transition from First Steps fully. After repeated attempts, again, document as much as you can those attempts, so that you can make sure that that meets the Department of Education's standard, right? Because you have to have evidence to back up that claim if you put that in the IEP system or your SIS. Otherwise, the district will receive a finding. That's kind of the DOE's stance on that. So if the student withdrew from the school, obviously that option should be very clear. If they revoke consent for testing, of course, that's an allowable exception. So is the withdrawing. Timeline is missed because of the birthday, as long as there's no extended school year. That's the selection we talked about, and that's an allowable exception. 8 is the timeline missed because the parent refused to bring them in for the evaluation. Another allowable exception, as long as you're documenting everything. And number 9, this is going to be updated next year. Right now, I think it still says the definition is timeline missed, First Steps referral late. And I think this is why this caused confusion for many years for a lot of people like me, because I interpreted that as the First Steps, the referral from First Steps, right, to the LEA was late, whereas it's actually the clarification that they're using now, and they're going to be changing this, I think, for next year, is it's going to say timeline missed, child began First Steps services less than 90 days before the 3rd birthday. So hopefully that's clear, because I think a lot of people were selecting that, meaning the other, understandably, thinking it meant they were late for Part B. 10, timeline missed because the kid moved in. And then 99 means timeline missed any other reason. So if it's any other reason, it's going to be non-compliant. Any other reason. Okay. All right. So data reporting, These fields might look a little bit different from what you see in your student information system. So we wanted to clarify some things here because I think this is from data exchange. I think the report, the EV roster might show these column headers. I'm pretty sure that's what this is referencing. So it says begin date, that's the date of the referral. The description of that means that's the date of the referral. So not like the IEP begin date or something else that can be confused with. Parental consent date is the date that the parent signed the parental consent form. I think that's pretty clear. IEP review date is the date that the case conference committee convened. That's called IEP review date. That's what that means. And then there's first steps transition date, which could be confusing. So thankfully we've got the description here. That's the date the child fully transitioned from first steps, which includes the IEP implementation. So that's when the full transition happened, not the transition meeting that first steps holds. That's a different thing. So this is essentially when did they fully transition? Therefore, when did they, the IEP go into implementation? Okay, so I haven't seen any questions in the chat. We do have some frequently asked questions that we're going to address here that thankfully the department kind of came up with for this presentation, and subsequent document, or a document that you'll see on a later slide here you'll have access to that has these as well. In addition to this, just in case some of you folks came in late, maybe I'll put the link to this PowerPoint in the chat again to make sure everybody has access to it. So the first frequently asked question we have is, what happens if the LEA has a non-compliant record? So, and this is looking at the annual, sorry, excuse me, the annual report, the EV or the EV roster, that is reviewed from July, right? The July 1 to June 30th. That's reviewed in July. And so within 90 days of their review of that certified data, the SEA, so the Department of Education, will notify the district in writing of any findings of noncompliance. And that will include things like whatever those actions might be. Could be a corrective action plan might be needed, a root cause analysis. There are some other steps as well. And so the hyperlink here, which I know you can't see, but it's in the PDF of this PowerPoint that I just put in the chat. You should be able to click on that and access the monitoring and compliance. And it shows you that monitoring cycle. If there's finding of noncompliance, here's what happens with, for the fall audit, what to expect for the spring audit. And some of those requirements might differ if this is depending on, if this is the first year of the district's non-compliance, or if they're considered continued non-compliance, which is more than 1 year or 2 years, I guess, if it's 2 years. And then long-standing would be if it's more than 2 years, so essentially 3 years. So that's kind of where you'll find more information about non-compliant records and what to do. The target for Indiana is 100% compliance for the federal. For indicator 12 is, I think also indicator 11 would be 100% as well. So they want every district to be 100% in compliance with these timelines. For RDA, for results driven accountability, it's I think 95% and above, you still get all the points for that that score that's used, because each indicator has a score, if you're not aware of, for the state level accountability. I think you get all 5 points for that. It's 1 through 5. So 5 points if it's 100, 5 points if it's 95% or above, and then only 1 point if it's anything below 95%. So, but essentially that the goal is 100%, but they just do things a little differently for RDA. The next question: will the child with circumstances relating to the timeline, which we had circumstances here. Those are the codes 1 through 4, really just 2 through 4. So, going back to the question, will those circumstances be considered as indicator 11 or indicator 12? We mentioned this already, but just to reiterate, all children receiving first step services will be included in both indicator 11 and indicator 12. Per the 2023 Early Childhood Transition Questions and Answers from OSEP, from Federal Education. So yes, to be in compliance, the LEA must meet both that third birthday requirement and the 50 instructional days. That's Indiana has the 50 days, 50 instructional days. Federal requirement is 60 calendar days. Indiana's is 50 instructional days, which is longer than it's actually longer at 60 calendar days. So hopefully that's clear. I know there's a lot of numbers and days and timelines to think about. So the third question: is this child with circumstances considered potentially eligible under Article 7? Yes, because all children that are receiving first step services are considered potentially eligible for Part B services, and they must complete necessary steps for transition. So they're all considered potentially eligible. The fourth one here: can the family opt out of sending directory information to the LEA? And the answer to that is no. So per that memorandum that Rosalind mentioned, that memorandum of understanding between FSSA and IDOE, Indiana is not an opt-out state. Some states opt out, but Indiana is not. So that directory information is to contact potentially eligible children and their families. That's going to be sent to the LEA and the Department of Education. So they both get that, the district and the DOE. But then once the LEA makes contact, the family has the right to review that evaluation, or they can revoke consent at any point during that process, the eval and the eligibility process. Or once Part B services begin, right? Once they receive that IEP, it's finalized, it's implemented, and the services begin. Of course, they can also always revoke consent at that point. And when that directory information is sent, that's done on a usually it's on a monthly basis, and so it's going to be usually a file that is sent to the LEAs, to the local education agencies, and the Department of Education on a monthly basis, essentially saying these are the children that we're servicing that have IFSPs right now, who are 30 months old, who will be turning 3 6 months from now. So it's usually a monthly chunk at a time. So that can help with planning when it comes to meeting these requirements for the timelines and getting everything in place that's necessary to meet those timelines. You have that 6 months essentially. And of course, there could be some cases where some kids are referred to first steps, less than 90 days and all that. So you might get some, later as well. But you're going to get the big chunk of most of these kids. You'll get those on 1 month at a time, typically is how that's done. And the contact information, I have it right here in my notes, and I'm just going to copy this and paste it into the chat so you can see what type of information is included if you're not aware of this. So it's the name of the child, their date of birth, their address, the name of the LEA, who their current service coordinator is with First Steps, the primary contact person for that child, it could be a parent, family, their phone, the county name, their email, and then the first steps cluster. And so that's that cluster. There are several clusters throughout the state, where it's an office, one office per cluster, that's providing first step services to all, several counties usually within that cluster. Um, and all of that is emailed through a secured file transfer. So now I'm not sure exactly what role at each district, what person or what role it is that receives that information from First Steps. I wasn't able to get a clear answer on that, and it might differ from district to district or school to school. But somebody with that, usually would be an administrative level of access, I would believe, would be receiving that regularly on a monthly basis. So if you don't know who that is, it might be a good idea to find out who gets those. And it might be more than one person, I don't know, at the district. Okay, so we have a few others before we wrap up here. When must services begin for summer birthday? I think we made this pretty clear already. Read through that if you're still if there's still any confusion around that. Otherwise, I'll skip down to the next one. When is a late first steps referral allowable as an exception under indicator 12? It says here, although it would still be logged as a late first steps referral, receiving communication late from first steps is not an allowable exception. I know that makes things really tricky. So it's important to have, a well-established communication channel between the district and first steps, or especially the preschool programming, right? And first steps, and also I'm sure the special education administrators, and whoever needs to be included in those communications, at school psychs, oftentimes. So it's not an allowable exception. The allowable exception is when the child is determined eligible for Part B, less than 90 birthday. What if there's not enough staff to complete evaluation during school breaks? I know that staffing is an issue all over the state right now, and it makes things really difficult. And it can be really tricky, meeting some of these timelines because of that. The recommendation here, and I think this is a good recommendation, is using that monthly first steps report to plan ahead. We will know for most of these kids 6 months ahead when those birthdays are. So when we can do those things, especially during the summertime, when it's tricky to get people around, maybe we can hold some of those before people leave for break. Also take into consideration other school breaks, right? Not necessarily, we're not always talking about summer breaks. It could be winter break, spring break, fall break. Even weekends get kind of tricky when we're talking about third birthdays. The birthday happens on a Saturday. You want to make sure that's in place before their third birthday, before they begin, before they come back. And that can also be difficult. We're normally thinking about summers because of the extended school year requirement for summer birthdays, but or at least that consideration. But also we need to think about those other breaks. And be careful with those timelines as well. I know some people use some calendars or like an Excel spreadsheet calculator. That's something that we've worked with districts on to calculate, when is the 50-day deadline based on when the parent consent was received. And a lot of times, you'll see like a list of dates of days off of the calendars, days where school's not in session due to a break. Just make sure you're keeping up with those things, because I know some districts struggle when there's a snow day or snow makeup day, or there's some change in the schedule. That's going to change when things are due. Or if there's a snow makeup day and then they didn't end up needing to use it, then if school's back in session that day, then that pulls those deadlines a little sooner. So just if you're using something like that, which can be very helpful, just as long as you're keeping up with it. And failure to meet the deadline will result in findings of non-compliance due to federal laws. And we got some contact information here for LEAs, for districts, and for families. So the two different emails. So for those of you that are working in LEAs, which I'm assuming everyone on here probably is with an LEA, OSC monitoring at doe.in.gov would be the email address. And special education at doe.in.gov would be one an email address to share with families if they'd like any contact information about any help with first steps transitions. Okay, so we have some resources before we wrap up here a little bit early. There's a spread the word document. I'll just go ahead and open this. And this was developed by the Department of Education. And I think we use just about every one of these, every page from this in our presentation. I don't think there's anything in here that's not on the slide deck that we've given you. So, but in case you need it, it's there. There's a spread the word document that DOE developed on preschool environments. So this might be of interest to those of you on here. And this is actually something that Rosalind and I are going to be presenting on in August. I think it's August 13th is when we have the session that we're doing just on preschool environments, on the continuum of placements for preschool kids. There can be a lot of confusion around, what those codes mean and how they're defined. And it's still confusing for me, I think, a little bit. So I always have to check. I don't have them memorized like the 50 through 57s. Sorry. So that's there. We have the Q&A document from OSEP, Article 7. I'm so sorry. And the roadmap, the transitions roadmap. Rosalind, do you want to talk about this roadmap? Do you mind? I think you're muted.
Yep, I was. So the First Steps Transition Roadmap, it's a timeline, for the transition process. And it's a real nice visual that you can look at, have handy in order to see where you are in that transition process. Especially if you're in with First Steps, then you'll see where you are or where you need to be. You can see what's coming up, for all your students. So it's a really good chart to have on your desk or on your board or anything like that. So it just goes into where you start when you're transitioning from First Steps to preschool. And what this kind of talks about a little bit about Article 7 and IDEA, so that this child will have a positive outcomes is what we always are working towards. So for months 31 through 34, that's the transition planning period or conference or meeting that we had spoke about earlier. That's the time that's to take place during that when that child is aged 31 to 34 months. And as mentioned earlier, the committee or that planning committee or conference, those that's on that team, they provide the family with information regarding special education services. And the family, of course, they can pursue or reject the evaluation, but that's what goes on during that transition planning time frame. By the third birthday, of course, that's when the IEP is to be implemented. Patrick spoke about that and exceptions and so forth, but the roadmap here shows what's supposed to take place. By that third birthday, the IEP should be implemented, the evaluation should be completed and the IEP implemented by that child's third birthday. And of course, we did speak about the extended school year and if this child's birthday happens around the summertime, or as Patrick mentioned, also during any break, winter break, spring break, fall break, or so forth. So what, where we are, it's like a calendar. Also, we have month 30. I think I went, yeah. I think it goes down, up, down, up, and
Oh, right.
I went
Yeah.
across instead of down. I apologize for that. At month 30,
That's okay.
yeah, before month 31 through 34, so I'm supposed to go up and down. First steps, they send the directory information that uh, of the children that are potentially eligible. That's that monthly report that goes out to that they send to the LEA. And that shows that. And then I already spoke about the 31 to 34 months of transition planning period. Then the 45-day rule. So that's at month 34. And then the third birthday, I mentioned that. And then after the third birthday. So this is just a beautiful, to me, first steps transition roadmap. But, go that way with it. Not going across like the way I did, but go down, up, down, up.
It confused me. The first time I saw
I
this, it confused me
apologize.
too. It took me a minute.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but I agree. I think if I worked in a school, especially preschool, I would have this printed out and put, when we were working in districts, this would have been very helpful to have, just as a kind of a one-page reference of everything we talked about during this
It's
session.
right here. Yeah, so you can just kind of eyeball it real quick.
Yeah, and we can't take credit for it. Someone at the Department of Education did this. So that's in the link at the bottom of that page, which you'll have in your PowerPoint. But let us know if you have any any questions of this about any of these things or any of these resources. You can just email that OSC monitoring at doe.in.gov if you have any issues accessing any of these documents. Okay. This is the end. This is it. So thank you so much for sitting and sticking it out. I apologize I've just got a terrible cold and I've been coughing like crazy. Thankfully, I was able to get through most of it without having a coughing fit, but I got.
You did good.
I'm doing all right. Thank you. Thanks, Leah. So if you, we'll stick around for a little bit here. If anybody has any questions, try to help answer. And before you sign off, we'd really appreciate it if you could complete the evaluation here, either using this link or the QR code. If you use the link, just click on the drop down that asks, I'll just click on it right now so you can see it, the title of the session you attended, so the workshop here, and then you would select early childhood transition, and then evaluate there. And once you complete the evaluation, then you'll receive a PGP certificate at some point pretty soon. I'd say probably within a few days, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, probably. As soon as I get the recording, I typically send it out. The certificates along with the recording, so they'll have that information all at the same time. So hopefully I'll have the recording by tomorrow or Monday at the latest, and then I can send out certificates at that time.
Cool. Okay. Great. Well, we'll stick around if anyone has any questions. And this is session recorded. So once we have that recording, you'll have that information. The recording. You can share it with anybody in your schools that you think could benefit from this. And yeah, big shout out to the Department of Education. They created really all the resources that we're using to present this today, made things a lot easier for us because we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, they really covered everything in this, which is good, right? Because they're the DOE and they did excellent on this. Yeah, there's nothing we saw nothing we felt like needed to be changed. So